first time in Puerto Rico, and very happy to be here. And thanks to Antonio for the invitation. One of the things that I have struggled with in my own work as a teaching and learning specialist is the tension I feel between the undoubted value of what we do on the web, which has changed my life, which has brought me into contact with many people whom I would never have met, which opens up all sorts of opportunities to transcend barriers of time and space, opportunities for self-directed learning, opportunities for creative learning pathways. But there's a tension between that and what we do at a place like Sagrado Corazon, a place like Mary Washington, a place like Virginia Commonwealth University. I continue to work in traditional higher education. I continue to work with students who come in as 18-year-olds, leave when they're 21 or 22 with a bachelor's degree, and I continue to think that that's valuable. At the same time that I try to build out opportunities for online learning and use the web in creative and sometimes radical, disruptive ways, I continue to think that there's great value in having people together in a learning community, especially at a particular time in one's development, in which one is passing from adolescence more or less into adulthood, although I hear from my sociologist friends that adulthood now begins about 35 or so. In my case, I continue to wait for adulthood. Every morning I wake up and I think today I will be an adult, and it just hasn't happened yet. So,
me too.
Yeah, good. So this is a mind problem for me. How can I be bold, innovative, radical, think about online learning, which is my number one strategic priority this year at Virginia Commonwealth University. We're trying very hard to engage in a significant and substantive and innovative way with learning mediated by the World Wide Web, by personal interactive networked computing. How do I do that and still believe that there is real value in coming together for what's now called a traditional four-year education? I don't believe they're mutually exclusive, but at the same time I don't believe that online learning means what we have done traditionally is outmoded or is wrong. So I've called this talk Time on Task because that's a measure of how hard you've worked, how you've applied yourself to your studies. It's something that we know correlates well with academic success. And the question then is, what is the task we spend time on during a four-year college education? And here's where the divide begins to happen. At first the title changes. What is this time on the college task? What is the task that college as a whole represents? Not just degree completion. You can do that very easily online. Not just work within particular courses. You do that very easily online. What does it mean to be part of the college experience? What is that task? What do we think happens? Now, I should add very quickly that I'm going to talk in idealistic terms about the best of what I take that four-year college education can provide. I think what we're learning in the online learning revolution is that what college says it does and what really happens from the point of view of the learner are often two very different things. I once had my students do in a first-year composition class do an analysis of several colleges' mission statements. I'm sure your college has a mission statement. We do. This is a very idealistic statement about lifelong learning, about citizenship, about the life of the mind, about all these things which, if you go to individual students, chances are they haven't read the mission statement. If they have, they haven't thought about it. And at the end of 4 years, they may or may not have that experience that the mission statement promises. I recognize that. At the same time, because it doesn't happen doesn't mean that it's not possible or that it doesn't happen for anyone. And so what I'm trying to think through today is, in a very informal way, please do interrupt me at any time, I'm trying to think through, well, what is the thing that we think will happen as a result of all of the experiences in a four-year college? Something that would be more difficult to do online, though I don't think impossible. So, not just time on task, which the credit hour is supposed to measure, but time on the college task. I like to have what are called oblique strategies. Do you know those oblique? Instead of going straight at it, you go at an angle. So I want to start with an oblique strategy as I share these thoughts with you. I want to tell you about my favorite podcast. It's a podcast from the BBC, and it's called In Our Time. Do any of you listen to In Our Time? It says it's about the history of ideas. Here's the little sidebar box from Wikipedia. Every show is about 45 minutes long. The host's name is Melvin Bragg. It's been aired for the last 15 years. And I love the blurb here from the London Review of Books. Bragg, the host, gives short shrift to pretension of any kind while remaining stalwart in his search for knowledge. That sounds like a good individual learner's mission statement. His methodology in Our Time is not unlike that of a man throwing a stick for a dog. He chucks his questions ahead, and if the chosen academic fails to bring it right back, he chides them. He retains enough of his bluff Cumbrian origins. He's not from London, he's from a province in England. Not to be taken in by gambling, just frolicking, and tweedy high spirits. That is to say, he is not intimidated by professors. So let me tell you the format of this show. Every week, Melvin Bragg goes into a studio in the BBC, and he talks with 3 professors about a topic. Each week the topic is different. Each week the 3 professors are different. Melvin Bragg is not himself an academic, but he has notes from these experts they've provided him with a week ahead of time. He studies the notes and he asks the professors questions that start at a certain point and go to an end point, and he elicits from them a kind of narrative. He brings out a story about various topics. For example, this is the website. This week, the topic is the Book of Common Prayer. Origins in the 16th century, at the Reformation. Thomas Cranmer and some others put this together in England. And I haven't listened to this one yet. I'll listen to it when I get home. But what he'll do is sit in the room. 3 experts will be there, and he will just start asking them questions, teasing out of them some arc of meaning. Now, is this a show about religion? Sometimes. Is it a show about philosophy? Sometimes. Is it a show about history? Sometimes. Is it a show about social science? Sometimes. Science? Yes. Biology? Chemistry? Physics? Yes. Social science? Psychology? Well, here's some recent episodes. The Book of Common Prayer. Galen. Exoplanets, which I liked a lot. Exoplanets are planets orbiting other stars. And Melvin Bragg is constantly playing the part of a curious individual who asks questions, keeps the professors talking without letting them get off track, which is hard. The Mamluks, a race of people who were both high in government and slaves. They helped to build Cairo. Blaise Pascal, famous mathematician, philosopher, geometer. Last year, the invention of radio, the romance of the 3 kingdoms, the physiocrats, prophecy, relativity. This is interesting. It begins to look like a curriculum. It begins to look like something you would get if you went to university. You would have some of this, some of that, some of the other. Let me see if I can get onto the web and show you some of the recent stuff. All right. So, for example, you can explore the archive. And if you explore the archive, where we are now, You can go back and back and back, relativity. You can go forward, backward. You can listen by genre. So let's see, if I go here, if it'll take me to the, yeah. So if you notice over here, culture, history, philosophy, religion, science. Do you have a general education curriculum here? It looks like this. I'm working on a general education curricular innovation right now. In fact, it's due at 5 this afternoon. Maybe I'll finish it, we'll see. But I look at this and I think, why do I like this so much? What is this? Why? What does this represent? To me, this represents a small university experience. Not a small university, but the university experience in miniature. So what happens during these 4 years as our students are exposed to this wide array of learning in the sciences, the humanities, the social sciences, the performing arts, the visual arts? What is that happens? It isn't just that you finish a course in this or that and you get a grade. That does happen. It isn't just that you take 120 credits, that's what we do at my university, and you get a degree. Something else is possible. Something else that I think of as time on the college task. And I started thinking about this. We know that about 85% of the learning that happens in college happens outside the classroom. We hope that some of that involves students interacting with each other in ways that make connections among the courses that they're taking. We could be a lot more intentional about fostering that. But I know that happened with me. I talked to my classmates. We shared the courses we were taking. We talked together about what it was we were learning. And though we were learning about this and we were learning about that, there was a bigger sense in which we were learning about learning itself. And learning about learning by being exposed to the wide variety of human accomplishment, human learning, human endeavor. And I thought, at its best, universities, over that 4-year span, can bring students into a deep understanding of human possibility by looking at what we as a species have accomplished. Now, our track record is not uniformly positive. As a species, we're pretty good at poisoning the planet, disrespecting each other. I don't need to make a long list. You know how that goes. And yet, look at what we've built together. Think about what we were able to pass on from generation to generation. When you get to college, it seems to me, for the first time, at least it felt this way for me, you have the experience of peeking over the crest of the hill and seeing the vast landscape of human possibility stretching out in front of you. And then, hopefully, you find in yourself the courage, the curiosity to go and build in that landscape yourself. So I'm working these ideas out, and one day I came across a column written by Malcolm Gladwell. Now, Malcolm Gladwell is very easy to make fun of, but I will not do that today. I find his ideas intriguing. I'm very glad that he's speaking to a general audience. And you may have heard of this thing that Malcolm Gladwell wrote about in his book Outliers called the 10,000 hour rule. Have you heard about the 10,000 hour rule? The idea is this: to attain mastery in anything requires about 10,000 hours of practice. This was actually the result of a research project done many, many years ago by a couple of social scientists. I think that one was a cognitive psychologist. And they were looking at people of high accomplishment: composers, engineers, architects, scientists, mathematicians. How much did they work before they made their first important breakthrough? And by and large, it worked out to about 10,000 hours. Now, lately there's been some pushback against Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour popularization. Some people have pointed out that some athletes who are especially gifted get to mastery in the broad jump or the pole vault or the 100-yard dash very quickly, maybe 3,000 hours. And some people are able to get to certain kinds of mastery maybe at 8,000 or 9,000 hours. But Gladwell, in responding to some of his critics, started thinking about the two kinds of mastery that are possible. One is a kind of mastery that has to do with doing the same thing over and over, better and better and better. And the other is a kind of mastery that has to do with seeing many, many complex situations so that you build out your mind's capacity for complexity. And that's where I'm going. I think it's interesting that if you add up the number of hours in a fall semester, spring semester, over 4 years, it turns out to be 15-week semesters, say 40 hours a week. It gets around 10,000 hours. Everyone's always saying, well, couldn't you just do it in 2 years? Couldn't you just do it in 3? Can't we accelerate the time to degree? But you can't accelerate the time on the college task, I think, not as easily as we would think. Maybe if we go in the summers, we can do it in 3 years. But it's one of those things, it's like, well, why did we pick 4 years? Is that magical? Maybe not, but it is interesting that it maps onto this 10,000 hours. Not 3,000. 3,000 would be like practicing your golf swing or practicing throwing a dart. Too many models of learning assume that that's what happens when we learn in college. It's like practicing something that is repetitive, that we just need to drill on. I think that the time on the college task is bigger. I think that what students get their first taste of mastery for at the end of 4 years is the complexity of cognitive possibility. Now, you never master that, but even to know what it is takes some practice. This is how Malcolm Gladwell puts it in a recent essay for the New Yorker. And Simon and Chase are the two scientists who came up with the rule. The point of Simon and Chase's paper years ago was that cognitively complex activities take many years to master because they require that a very long list of situations and possibilities and scenarios be experienced and processed. And this is the sentence that caught my eye. If the surgeon who wants to fuse your spinal cord did some newfangled online accelerated residency, you should probably tell him no, even if he did well on the exam. It does not invalidate the 10,000 hour principle, however, to point out that in instances where there are not a long list of situations and scenarios and possibilities to master, like jumping really high, running as fast as you can in a straight line, or directing a sharp object at a large round piece of cork, expertise can be attained a whole lot more quickly. What Simon and Chase wrote 40 years ago remains true today. In cognitively demanding fields, there are no naturals. And that leads me to the conclusion I've reached, at least provisionally, and we'll talk about it, and you can tell me that I'm wrong, and maybe you'll convince me. But it seems to me that the time on the college task can only be accelerated so much because it takes a long time, a lot of practice in a community of learning with a vast array of human disciplines, forms of inquiry, possibilities right there in front of you to begin to be able to master not just a cognitively demanding field, but the demands of coming to grips with cognitive complexity itself. Too often we say, oh, the idea of the life of the mind is old-fashioned. It's something that we used to do in the ivory tower, where we didn't have the pressures of the workplace, and we didn't have the pressures of the demanding contemporary society. But I think we've sold ourselves short. To me, the life of the mind doesn't simply mean retirement or simple contemplation. It means a practiced encounter with cognitive complexity in the company of others who are also practicing that, to give us a view of what it could mean to be human at our best. And that's what I've arrived at so far. So I would welcome the opportunity to be in conversation with you about that. And tell me that I'm wrong, because that would be fun.
That would be fun.
You want to save questions for the end, or do you want to? What do you?
As you like, as the people would say.
Yep.
I actually like your response to the idea of, let's get this whole education thing out of the way so we can go on and get our work done. And a lot of that is kind of taking up even the narrative of, I'm in a class and someone will like boldly come up and say, well, I have to work 30 hours, so I have no idea how I'm going to do that. It's just on a practical level. But how do you balance that with the other kind of framework that's built around it, the expense of school? So I agree with you entirely about your vision. And I wonder how universities and a community come together to kind of balance that with providing the possibility.
Well, that's a great question. I think that we have to shift the paradigm, and colleges and universities bear some responsibility for this. Students do too, and it's also part of the tradition. It's too easy to think of what happens if a student goes to school, doesn't work, just devotes themselves to the school experience. And really what that means is a lot of drinking, a lot of shenanigans. That what really happens is it's just a kind of a long spring break. But I think that if we are more intentional, playful, creative about building out the possibilities for learning and encountering each other as learners, including the vital and neglected role of learners narrating their own experience as learners, we could very quickly find that people wouldn't go to spring break, metaphorically, because it wasn't as much fun as jamming with the ideas. But we have to get over ourselves a little bit. Professors have got to recognize that students have ideas. They're not just empty receptacles to be filled. Students have got to understand that if they're not bringing it, it's not like it's going to be there anyway. They're helping to co-create this. And the public has got to understand that, in a way, that four-year education can be like study abroad. Nobody says, oh, don't study abroad. You don't need to do that. We recognize that as a value. Why? Because you encounter things you wouldn't encounter otherwise. All the things that we say we value about a four-year education. Well, let's make four-year education more like study abroad. Help people understand that they're having an experience here that they're not going to have an opportunity to have again in that way at a particularly critical time. I mean, it's going to be hard, but I did not have to work unless I chose to when I was an undergraduate. The cost spiral is out of control, and we have to figure that out. I think that, to flip your question, if we say, well, we don't have to figure that out, we'll just make it all freeze-dried content delivery, and you take it in as quickly as you can, problem solved, then we're heading down a much more rigid and less productive path. So I don't have a final answer for that, but I think we have to work at shifting. Audrey would say we have to reclaim that narrative.
Sure.
Yeah. Yes.
What about quality time? Because you are talking about 4 years, and you can waste your time.
Yes.
So, what about, how do you explain quality time and time?
So there are typically two approaches to getting young people to use their time wisely. One of them, and this is reductive, but I'll just try this out. One of them is to set in place a system of surveillance, strict rules, and rewards. Sometimes that might be necessary. For me, it's more interesting to try to awaken intrinsic motivation so that students get involved for the same reasons they get involved in other activities they do. They're interested. Many of the structures of traditional schooling discourage student initiative and student interest, it seems to me. The message is, sit down, I will give you this, and I want to see if you can give it back to me on a final exam. Very easy to manage, very carefully controlled, and it sends a message to the student, my life begins when I leave the classroom. I want the student to believe that his or her life begins when they enter this community of learners and that they're having a great adventure. But that's, it really does, it will take reimagining the way we conceive of the college as a learning community. I think we can do it. My experience is that faculty become faculty because they're interested in something, but even faculty learn pretty quickly that being interested in something is something you do on your own time. You know, most of the time you're delivering content, you're enforcing rules, or you're in faculty meetings. And, you know, but, and no one has time for anything else. We'll have to be more intentional about that. And I think if we have a collective will, we can do it. If we don't, online learning has the potential simply to be content delivery and put what is valuable about traditional education in the dustbin, right? And then we'll lose something. We won't get it back very easily. My students already think of their education as a conveyor belt. We need to militate against that. I mean, this is the other part of it. If faculty come together and want to make this change, we could do it. We could still do it. But I don't know whether the will is there. Anyway, that's my provisional answer. Yeah?
I once heard a professor of, the title he had, his name was Ray Land, and his title was a professor of higher education, which it
Nice.
sounds more over time that you're becoming, is a professor of higher ed, thinking critically about what higher ed is. And one of his theories that I really liked and I was compelled by is his theories of, a pedagogy of uncertainty and an experience of uncertainty. And I'm wondering, like, is that part of this complexity of the 10,000 rule that's at the heart of it? You're not going to get any uncertainty in a prepackaged module when you know it's coming, it's freeze-dried, etc.
No, that's right. That's right. I'll be talking about this tomorrow as well. The experience of uncertainty can be very frightening, so you need to get kind of habituated to it. Professors need to be franker about their own uncertainty. One of the models of a course I'm working on right now on what I'm calling forms of inquiry would be essentially an introduction to the history of a discipline. Let's say biology. Biology as a form of inquiry. We need to know the methodologies, but I also want to know, how did this come about? When did biologists first call themselves biologists? What questions were they trying to answer that weren't being answered well by being called naturalists or whatever else, right? What are the big questions that have propelled the discipline forward? And what are the big questions that make the discipline change over time? Now, I know the history of that in English studies because I'm an English literature person. But I was talking to my wife about this, and she said, how many English professors do you think know the history of their own discipline? It's ironic. We organize ourselves by disciplines, by forms of inquiry, but these are constructions, and they have an uncertain future. Share that with the students. Let the students know that we arrive at provisional conclusions we find useful through a certain form of inquiry, which will shift as we move forward. That would be fascinating to me. That's another part of this whole uncertainty thing. But it's messy. Students just, what do I need to know? You need to know that you don't know everything. And professors don't want to admit they don't know something because then they lose authority or something, I guess. But I need that name from you because I think a professor of higher education, I'd like to apply for that job, And there are people out there thinking about this. There's a book I'm reading now called A Checklist for Change by a guy named Robert Zemsky, who's at University of Pennsylvania. And he's been writing about higher ed change for about 40 years now. And it's really fascinating to see. It's like either watching a prisoner in chains trying to, get free, or hopefully, optimistically, the chick is pecking at the egg trying to get out. And I would engage students in that. Students should be studying the university while they're in the university. What a strange little invention this thing is, and it's uncertain. it's changing. So anyway, I want to get that name from you. I love
The
that.
story of academic freedom, for instance, is fascinating.
Indeed,
Indeed.
and STEMmED talks about that. Yes.
You give me the title of the book.
Yes.
again?
Yep. It's right here.
And what about the confusion that students need to experience?
Exactly.
That's part of
Yes.
the same stuff. right?
Yes. So what I used to like to tell my writing students, because that was the hardest of all, a student who's learning writing wants immediately to go to something that either sounds authoritative or is simple, because writing is a very cognitively demanding task. So they would all write papers, for hundreds of thousands of years, men and women all over the world. They would just empty phrases. Not good. And I would tell them, if you're confused, that's not an obstacle to learning. It's the first sign of learning. It's like when the wound begins to itch, that, it's healing. So a psychologist named Paul Sylvia likes to talk about knowledge emotions. And one of them is interest, one of them is awe, one of them is confusion. Confusion is a knowledge emotion, and you must experience that. It's a marvelous place, So yeah, it's my story.
I mean, one of Gladwell's, if I remember right, prime examples is the Beatles.
Yes.
Okay? So I mean, all they did when they were in Germany and forming before they were popular is play music all the time. They barely ate, they didn't feed, and maybe that's part of the problem. Is like that sets up this example of like, you're all in or not, and what are the ways that it can be somewhat of a hybrid, the way you focus your time. But also, the Beatles knew what they wanted to do. They knew that this was their dream, and they just pursued it, and they were locked into that.
So I think you have to be all in. I mean, you've actually uncovered something now. I should confess it. You have to be all in.
Right.
But what are we all in for? I mean, the Beatles wanted to be, where are we going, Johnny? To the toppermost
Yeah.
of the poppermost. I mean, that's what they would say. What do we want to be as human beings? I mean, there are things we want to do. There are things we feel called to do.
Right.
But you can't think about that well unless you have a strong idea of what the possibilities are. And how do you know what the possibilities are unless you've got a strong sense of what it means to be with other people trying to learn about what the possibilities are. But you're right. I mean, there's a sense in which what I'm talking about demands a huge commitment.
And the space to develop that commitment, because
Right.
you ask
Yes.
that commitment,
Yes.
and then you need to give that to the student.
Yes.
And for instance, I'm always appalled at this idea that we grew with, that in any curriculum, a student will have some courses that he or she will hate.
Yes.
And why it has to be that way, even if the course won't interest the student as a main area of study, but why the student should hate that area, for instance, a theology course or a mathematics course, etc. Why should it be that way?
So if I could do a twin development activity, it would be about interest. And I would do faculty development on making what we do as interesting as it can be. And I would do student development on how to awaken interest within yourself, even if it's not something you would naturally be interested in.
That's
And I mean, that's a skill. You can do
that's
that.
a skill.
You find the thing that at first, I mean, I'll take geology, even though I find it interesting. So it's not a good example. I find everything interesting, so I don't know what to do. But I didn't always, right? I never took Milton as an undergraduate because I was sure it would be boring. Now I had a very interesting teacher, but by the time I got to graduate school, I knew that I had a responsibility to make it interesting as well. That was an easy one. I'll give you another example. I had a very boring teacher. I won't tell you what he was teaching. But there was something on the syllabus, it caught my interest, and I just pursued it. And he was fine with that. Most teachers, even if they're not spectacular teachers, respond well to students who find it interest. So there's a trick to it, And I would love to have that be part of what students learn to do. Yeah.
Interest-driven curricula.
Yes, yes, but not simply relying on interests that are there.
Oh, sure.
You have
To develop.
to awaken interest as well, yeah.
A great anecdote from Mary Washington. Dan, who's the accounting prophet?
Oh, Dan Hubbard.
Yeah. This is great. He was telling me that he gets tired of his students saying, you know, I've got this class and I hate the topic. And so he had them do an assignment where they talked to the professor to try to understand why the professor had this passion
Yes,
for the topic.
exactly.
And he described this one student who literally he walked into someone, I forgot, maybe you know this whole story, but he went into the professor's office and sat down and he said, you know what, I really hate your class. Can you tell me why it's interesting? And the professor went back to Dan and relayed this experience and said, you know, it actually opened a great conversation for him as well to get back to talking about his passion for his own topic.
Well, we were talking at lunch about course trailers.
Yeah.
This is something that I'm hoping we're going to be able to do at VCU. They've done it at Harvard. Basically, they're 2 to 4 minute videos in which the professors are talking about the class they're teaching, why they're interested, what they hope students will be able to learn from it, and it's much better than just a list of learning outcomes. Something of that passion actually comes across, and if not, hopefully the video team will keep shooting it until it's like,
Jim put a trailer into his Baba blog.
yes,
That's right.
yeah. Trailers are. I mean,
Great.
that's a trailer is there to awaken your interest in the movie.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Harvard has 92 of these up on their Vimeo page, and some of them are really quite wonderful. We'll do it better at VCU, so soon you'll see how you realize you're really doing it. Because students aren't involved in the Harvard videos. But,
They are not.
no, but they should be. That would be it. I mean, how great would it be to have students who found
Oh, yeah.
a really rich learning experience in your class now make a 2-minute video to share with other people what it was that you found so interesting. And hopefully it would not just be about, you know, your professor as a rock star, but about the discussions you had amongst yourselves. In fact, you could say, you know, don't focus just on the professor, focus on the learning community.
But they're substituting these trailers for the part where they go and save the courses at the beginning of each semester in Harvard?
They're separating it from what? I didn't understand the last part.
They go, during the beginning of each semester, they go to seek out classes.
Oh, I don't know exactly how that works. They started it when they changed the general education curriculum, and they felt a need to make students aware of why these were general education courses, why they would want to take them, because typically students take general education courses only because they're required. So I think that this probably does cut down a little bit on just the sampling. And it also has the 2 great effects of it makes the professor articulate something about their course that might not have been explicit, and I think it also prepares the student. I would have loved to have seen these, because then going in the first day, I would feel more all in. You know, I would know, oh,
Commitment,
yeah, you get a feeling of the ethos of the class. Yeah.
It's interesting because the all-in idea is something that Alan and I had kind of, along with Martha, figured out with the DS-106 experience. So if you want to do it, fine, but we're going to send you an email before basically telling you not to do it. We're going to say, like, drop this class.
Right.
Ready.
Right.
Like, horrify them. Like, it's like a horror trailer but in text, so not nearly as effective. Like, but it really is like a Stephen King email. Like, your dog will attack you, you know, your mom will turn into a zombie, like the whole 9 yards. But as a way of saying, like, you're committed to, these are things you can be asked and determined to do. So it's an interesting connection.
Yeah,
And they never
yeah,
drop.
absolutely.
They
And
never
they
drop.
Exactly.
Poor guys.
Okay.
All right, who's next?
Who's next? Dentist.
I'm going.
All right, Alan.
Sorry, Jim.